Hello, my name is Rob, and today I will talk about Bill C-5, which is currently in the Senate. It has passed in the House of Commons in Canada. This is federal legislation, and it's related to Bill 5 and Bill 15 in British Columbia, Bill 5 in Ontario. This is legislation which will harm endangered species and wildlife. And it will infringe upon Indigenous rights. So I will look at some articles from, I think these were from last week, and see if there was any articles from this week as well. I'm just going to change screens. So the first article is a blog. The public interests need to reconsider, amend Bill C-5, Building Canada Act. And this is in the Canadian Environmental Law Association. This was on June 11th. And the government is saying that they want to address the U.S. tariffs on Canada by advancing nation-building projects. And then there's a quote. At the First Minister's meeting in Saskatchewan on June 2nd, First Ministers agreed on the urgency of building major projects that produce and connect clean and conventional energy, goods, and services to markets across Canada and the globe, including highways, railways, ports, airports, oil pipelines, critical minerals, mines, nuclear facilities, and electricity transmission systems. And the Canadian Environmental Law Association emphasized the items in the quote. And then they're saying that the Act, the Build Canada Act, which they call the BCA, fails to explicitly include any opportunities for public review, comment before a project is added to Schedule 1. And I have the Act. We can look at that. And then this article says if they are pre-approved under prescribed federal laws listed in Schedule 2, there's the Fishery Act, Species at Risk Act, Canadian Navigable Waters Act, Canadian Environmental Protection Act, or some of the pre-approved legislation. So they don't even have to follow the regulations or legislation under specific acts, mainly environmental acts. And it's important to consider that Environmental Protection Act, some of the legislation doesn't just deal with the environment. Some of it looks at the economy as well. I'm thinking Environmental Assessment Act, I think it's called, looks at the is it beneficial economically, is it beneficial socially. So it's not just the environment. And these are things that should be looked at prior to approving a project. Otherwise, you end up wasting money if the result is that it's not good for the economy in the long run, or it's not good for society, and then there could be protest or legal action or land defense. Schedule 21 of the Act allowed Cabinet to add new federal laws to Schedule 2 for pre-approved purposes. And there have been some changes as a result of this going to committee. And some of them have been approved. But the legislation is still in the Senate. And then Section 23 permitted Cabinet to exempt Schedule 1 projects from the provisions of the Build Canada Act. And Section 21 allowed Cabinet to add new federal laws to Schedule 2 for approval purposes. And then Cabinet was allowed to exempt one or more national interest projects from any federal enhancement that would otherwise be applicable to such projects. And then CELA is saying that Bill C-5 should be withdrawn and carefully reconsidered with public and Indigenous input. But if it does go through Parliament, they're saying that it must be amended to include important legal guardrails to ensure certainty, transparency, and accountability in decision making under unprecedented legislation, and that it should be involve the principle under UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People of free, prior, and informed consent. And there should be quote, use it or lose it deadlines, which condition by conditions expire or lapse if the project is not substantially commenced within a prescribed timeline. And that's something that I support. Use it or lose it. Let's see. I will go to the next. So I looked at the response to environmental defense. They have an article, response to tabling of the Building Canada Act. And they were saying that the legislation must ensure that it doesn't compromise the federal government's obligations to due process environmental impacts and the duty to consult with Indigenous peoples, and honoring Indigenous rights is essential. And then they were saying that those conditions which they say that should be considered nation building project, such as green industrial strategy, closing the infrastructure gap for Indigenous communities, circularized packaging economy, millions of green, energy efficient, and affordable homes, scaled up public transportation, and then a resilient electric grid with east-west entryways with access to wind and solar. So they are saying that. And I will say that, like, just because something's renewable doesn't necessarily make it supported by Indigenous people. And then some renewable energy has negative impacts on the environment, which also must be considered, such as hydro when land is flooded. That can be a separate video by itself. Let's see if there's... So there's also West Coast law said that it's an anti-democratic legislation. And this was posted on June 6th. It says the minister will issue conditions on the approval, but it is unclear what the review process will entail, and there are no requirements to allow the public to have say about projects that affect them. And then Bill C5 tosses aside the notion of informed decision-making, precautionary principle, and the imperatives of reconciliation, the climate crisis, and democratic decision-making. Okay, so now I have the bill, Bill C5. It's called an Act to enact the Free Trade and Labour Mobility in Canada Act and Building Canada Act. My concerns are regarding the environment, mainly in Part 2, Building Canada Act. Let's see. Definitions are important. The definition of authorization means in respect of a national interest project, an approval or other decision or permit, license, regulations, or other document or instrument that is required by provision of an enactment, or if a portion of an enactment is listed in column 2 of Part 1 or Part 2 of Schedule 2 by the portion of the enactment to permit the project to be carried out in whole or part. National interest projects, that's section 4. The governor and council may, by order for the purpose of section 5, define national interest. And then there's specific criteria. The governor and council, if their opinion of that a project is of national interest, the governor and council may, on the recommendation of the ministry or order, amend Schedule 1 to add the name of a project and a detailed description of it, including the location of where it's located. Let's see. And then they're saying that it has to be, the project has to strengthen Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security, provide economic or other benefits to Canada, have a high likelihood of successful execution. It does say advance the interests of Indigenous people, so I like that. Contribute to clean growth and to meeting Canada's objective with respect to climate change. Those requirements about consultation. But consultation isn't enough. It should be free, prior, and informed consent. Okay, so section 6(1) of the Act, every determination and finding that has to be made, and every opinion that has to be formed in order for an authorization to be granted in respect to national interest project is deemed to be made or formed, as the case may be, in favor of permitting the project to be carried out with whole or part. So this is the piece of the legislation that I don't like, because it means everything prior to a decision being made doesn't have to be followed, like other pieces of legislation, especially like environmental legislation. And this is at a time when other provinces, including Ontario and British Columbia, are undermining their own environmental legislation. And I'm just going to go down. Oh, Environmental Assessment Act. It's saying sections 9 to 17 and 18 to 6. 18.3 to 18.6 of that Act do not apply in respect to the project and for the purposes of that Act. So there's going to be less impact assessment. So these are this is Schedule 2, Access to Information Act. So that's concerning that they don't have to follow that. Canada Elections Act. That's concerning. Conflict of Interest Act. Criminal Code, the Foreign Influence and Transparency and Accounting Act, the Investment Canada Act, Lobbying Act, Official Languages Act, the Indian Act. That has been repealed in the committee. I know that. And then there can be regulations. Oh, I thought there was more environmental acts that was included in this. Oh yeah, there was another schedule. Regulations can be made exempting one or more national interest projects from the application of any provision of that enactment or provision of regulations made under that enactment. They can make regulations saying that that other laws don't have to be followed. And then they can vary the application. Refer to in paragraph A in relation to one or more national interest projects. Oh, Schedule 1. Yeah, so this is Schedule 1 is the Fisheries Act. Canada Environmental Protection Act. Species at Risk Act. So the federal government and provincial government are both undermining environmental protections impacting species at risk. And that is concerning. So I will go to find other more recent news about Bill C-5. There was more news about Bill C-5. I haven't reviewed the news quite yet, but I have showed why it's problematic. Those red side dace will be impacted in Ontario. Different in regards to highways, it'll be more difficult to advocate for environmental protections. And we are in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. I hope to make an additional video about this, and right now we have to protest or advocate every project where there is an endangered species, because if we don't, then we risk losing endangered species. And endangered species are important for ecosystems and habitat protection, habitat is beneficial for everyone because it reduces flooding, droughts, etc. But that can be its own video. I hope that you have a good rest of your day, and I hope to be back soon with additional videos.